Today, I welcome you to the third documentary of the 95 Mountain Brigade's advance into Bangladesh, deeper towards Dhaka. As you might have seen in the previous video, how the 95 Mountain Brigade, commanded by Brigadier Hardev Singh Clare, had actually commenced some of the most daring raids alongside the Mukti Bahini against the Pakistani forces to test the defenses of the Pakistanis inside Bangladesh. So you might have remembered about how the 95 Mountain Brigade was actually a part of the 101 communication zone. The 101 communication zone was under the command of Major General Gurbakh Singh Gill. The 95 Mountain Brigade was just a part under the command of Brigadier Hardev Singh Clare. Now, this brigade had three infantry battalions. The 1st Maratha Light Infantry under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Bulbul Brar, the 13 Rajrif, and the 13 Guards. Also, the 56th Mountain Regiment, which was given to the 95 Mountain Brigade for exceptional fire support by 76mm Yugoslavian guns. The next phase of the attack was from the 3rd of December, where elements of the 95 Mountain Brigade had broken through the Jamalpur border outpost and had taken Bakshiganj, clearing out the Pakistanis from that area and killing Major Ayub, the commander of the Pakistani garrison, from the 31 Baluch. The 31 Baluch, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Sultan Ahmed from the Pakistani Armed Forces, was the main standing force against the 95 Mountain Brigade till the advance towards Jamalpur. Step-by-step advance to catch up with the 95 Mountain Brigade is as follows. So as explained before, if you have followed my previous videos regarding the advance of the 95 Mountain Brigade, this is from where? From Tura. The 95 Mountain Brigade has started their advance. The Mukti Bahini has been to their help all the time. Now, at first, the 95 Mountain Brigade commences a few attacks on the Jamalpur border outpost held by the Pakistanis, but they had failed. Later, with one of the battalions attacking the Jamalpur border outpost, the Indian Air Force comes in and destroys this border outpost. With Jamalpur finally being in Indian hands, the GOC of the 101 communication zone, under which the 95 Mountain Brigade is actually operating, gets wounded in action from an anti-tank mine blast on the Jamalpur Bakshiganj road here. As you can see, Bakshiganj was encircled by the 1st Maratha Light Infantry, another battalion from the 95 Mountain Brigade, cutting off this road, with the Mukti Bahini cutting off the Bakshiganj Jamalpur road. Major Ayub gets killed here in the roadblocks established by the 1st Maratha Light Infantry. And after the attack, the Pakistanis fail and eventually leave Bakshiganj, escaping towards Jamalpur. They cross the Brahmaputra river and escape towards Jamalpur, destroying a bridge here. Bakshiganj is finally in Indian hands by the 5th of December 1971. Now, this much of area is slowly coming under the control of the Indian Army. After the town of Bakshiganj has been liberated, the entire brigade forms up there. The 1st Maratha Light Infantry was the 1st battalion to enter the town. They had also captured a huge amount of Pakistani weapons and ammunition from the Bakshiganj garrison. The 13 Rajputana rifles went inside the town, and so were the 13 guards. The entire 95 Mountain Brigade formed up inside the town by the 5th of December night. Here, the folks of the 1st Maratha Light Infantry can be seen posing with the captured weapons and ammunition of the Pakistani 31 Baluch. The 95 Mountain Brigade concentrates here and starts their advance towards Jamalpur. The 1st Maratha Light Infantry is the 1st battalion to move up. Now, let's see what happens here to the headquarters of the Pakistani 31 Baluch, the fighting force of the Pakistani 93 Infantry Brigade standing up against the gallant fighters of the 95 Mountain Brigade. Let's see what happens. On the very day of the 5th of December, the 1st Maratha Light Infantry started their advance down south, followed by the 13 Rajputana Rifles, heading down towards Jamalpur, taking the Jamalpur Bakshiganj road. The 101 communication zone, with their commander being wounded in action, was replaced by Major General Gandharv Singh Nagra. On that day, the 13 Guards was also sent to join up in the action to liberate Sherpur. On the 6th of December, Sherpur was liberated by the joint forces of the Mukti Bahini and the 13th Guard. Brigadier Clare and Major General Gandhar Singh Nagra had moved up and had landed in the school grounds of Sherpur. They were honored and they were greeted by the local people and the Mukti Bahini. Also, Lieutenant General Jagjit Singh Arora, the GOC-in-C of the Eastern Army Command, had also landed, and he also gave a speech inspiring the local people in their fight for liberation. As the fight went on, the advance towards Jamalpur was not easy. On the way down south, the 1st Maratha Light Infantry and the 13 Rajputana Rifles were subjected to heavy Pakistani defenses, which they were breaking down systematically in their advance. The fight went on till the 7th of December 1971. In the fight, 13 Pakistani soldiers were killed, while the Indian Air Force was brought down again and again for airstrikes. It was also very unfortunate that the Pakistanis had destroyed the bridge on the Brahmaputra River on the 7th of December. Hence, the repairs were needed to be done to fix this bridge for the troops to cross the huge Brahmaputra River. The 13 Rajputana Rifles kept on with their advance and had moved up about 35 kilometers from Bakshiganj down towards Jamalpur, just closing in onto the river banks and establishing themselves with a heavy defensive position. The 1st Maratha Light Infantry was almost ready to cross the huge Brahmaputra River and begin the encirclement of Jamalpur. As of now, most of the 95 Mountain Brigade had relied on bullock carts and rickshaws. Yes, rickshaws from local Bengali people. And now, to cross the river, it was of utmost importance to use country boats that were available from the local people. After Brigadier Clare and General Nagra had been present in the ceremony in Sherpur, they had also taken the chopper to see how things were going down south in the concentration areas on the banks of the Brahmaputra River. Closing onto the river banks, Brigadier Clare was actually keeping watch with his binoculars to see how the Pakistanis were doing on the other side of the river. At that time, Major General Nagra was also closing with Brigadier Tenny Berry to see how the troops were doing and how the defenses were. At that time, from the other side of the river, heavy Pakistani RCL firing started. Brigadier Clare and General Nagra fled and jumped down inside a trench. But also at that time, heavy 120mm mortar firing started from across the river, pounding on their positions. They had managed to flee and they were safe for the time being. For their support, the CO of the 56th Mountain Regiment, Colonel Malik, opened up 76mm gunfire on the Pakistanis to keep them at bay on the other side. So this is the dire situation of the Pakistani 31 Baluch right now on the 7th of December. By the 7th of December, the 1st Maratha Light Infantry from the 95 Mountain Brigade has reached the banks of the Brahmaputra River. The 13 Rajputana Rifles has followed suit and have traveled about 35 kilometers as said before and has set up themselves on this side of the river. The 1st Maratha Light Infantry plans to cross the river on the night of the 7th of December itself. The guns of the 56th Mountain Regiment are already here, ready to cross the river anytime. The 13 guards come down all the way from Sherpur and soon follow up with the rest of the brigade, ready to cross the river whenever needed. The 31 Baluch, sitting at Jamalpur in the garrison, is waiting to be wiped out from the face of this earth. All that stands in between the survival of the 31 Baluch and the gallant Indian army is the Brahmaputra River. Also, to not forget, the Mukti Bahini is hounding for their blood. On the night of the 7th of December, the 1st Maratha Light Infantry under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Kuldeep Singh Brar started crossing the Brahmaputra River on country boats. That was the night that they stealthily moved across the Jamalpur-Maimanshing railway road, moving down south, establishing themselves south of Babki. By 2:30 a.m., immediately they started patrol clashes with the Pakistanis and the Razakars, capturing 6 Razakars. Also, in an ambush, they had destroyed a 2.5-ton Pakistani vehicle and also had lit another 1-ton Pakistani vehicle on fire. Eventually, from Babki, the entire battalion moved up to Mollapara, establishing a secure roadblock on the Jamalpur-Tangail road. This roadblock was fixed with machine gun nests and had ambush patrols ready to sight out any Pakistanis who might try to escape. The Jamalpur-Tangail road led all the way towards Tangail and then towards Dhaka, stopping the escape of the Pakistani 31 Baluch from escaping from Jamalpur at any cost. 1st Maratha Light Infantry, this one, as said before, comes down all the way from here to here, settles down here and establishes a roadblock on the Jamalpur-Tangail road. Jamalpur-Tangail road, this one, with elements of the Mukti Bahini. At that very night, a company of the 31 Baluch decided to investigate on these roadblocks and ambush, and they were mowed down by heavy fire from the defenses of the 1st Maratha Light Infantry, forcing them to flee, leaving their casualties. They fled towards Jamalpur and reported all of this to their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Sultan Ahmed. 2 Pakistani soldiers were taken POWs here, with 13 rifles being captured, alongside 2 machine guns. Unfortunately, Havildar Gajanan Chavan from the 1st Maratha Light Infantry was killed in action here. This was all happening on the 8th of December. At that very day, 13 guards under the command of Lieutenant Colonel M.S. Sodhi crossed the river, established themselves on the eastern side of the city of Jamalpur, cutting the Jamalpur-Maimanshing railway link and also the Jamalpur-Maimanshing road. The 13 guards established themselves securely by 6 a.m. on the morning of 9th of December. The 13 guards, they crossed the river, they established a roadblock here on the Jamalpur-Maimanshing road, also cutting off the Jamalpur-Maimanshing railroad. The 56th Mountain Regiment had also decided to carry their guns across the river. These were heavy Yugoslavian 76mm guns, and at first they were dismantled and then they were loaded upon the country boats and then they were taken across the river. The Brahmaputra river was huge, and this was all done at night. Meanwhile, the 167 Infantry Brigade of the 101 Communication Zone had moved up to Sherpur. From that brigade, the 6th Sikh Light Infantry was given to the 95 Mountain Brigade for the operations. Hence, from the western side of the city of Jamalpur, the 6th Sikh Light Infantry started encroaching upon the city. Now, from all the sides, with the 13 Rajrif still on the other side of the Brahmaputra river, secured firmly, with the 1st Maratha Light Infantry sitting to the south, with the 6th Sikh Ally sitting to the left, and with the 13 guards sitting to the right of the city. The 31 Baluch was sitting encircled inside the city of Jamalpur. They had nowhere to go. With all these fighting formations were the Mukti Bahini fighters from Sector 11, strengthening the Indian Armed Forces. They started giving intel about everything inside Jamalpur. The 6th Sikh Ally from the 167 Infantry Brigade establishes a roadblock here. On the afternoon of the 9th of December, Brigadier Hardev Singh Clare decided to join up with the 1st Maratha Light Infantry down south from the city of Jamalpur. He takes off in an Mi-4 helicopter with Captain Balbir Singh and 2nd Lieutenant Tahir from the Mukti Bahini, with the helicopter being flown by Flying Officer Sandeep Verma. And this helicopter landed close to the area held by the 1st Maratha Light Infantry. Now, at that time, patrol clashes and skirmishes were going on against the 31 Baluch, which was desperately trying to break out from the encirclement. At that time, Lieutenant Colonel Kuldeep Singh Brar, the commander of the 1st MLI, himself fired off a warning shot flare after seeing the Mi-4 helicopter closing in, so that Brigadier Clare gets a clear signal to pull out from that area. Yet, Brigadier Clare landed, and when his helicopter door has just opened, a senior NCO had moved up to greet him. Right in front of Brigadier Clare, the senior NCO was shot in the head from a stray Pakistani bullet. He dropped dead. Brigadier Clare joined up with Lieutenant Colonel Kuldeep Singh Brar, and he decided to control the operations from there itself. Lieutenant General Jagjeet Singh Arora, the GOC in C of the Eastern Command, was at Sherpur, and he asked Brigadier Hardev Singh Clare to commence the attack on Jamalpur at that very night on the 9th of December. But Brigadier Clare said that he will attack only when his troops are ready for the fight. He didn't want his troops to be just cannon fodder. General Arora also asked that if the para drop to reinforce his brigade, the para drop at the Pungli Bridge further south down Jamalpur close to Tangail, was to be postponed. But Brigadier Clare said that no postponing. The para drop will happen at the right time. He just asked General Arora to have faith in him, so that after the encirclement is complete and with a psychological approach on the enemy, only then will the attack on Jamalpur will commence. The Indian Air Force was called in to launch airstrikes on the positions of the 31 Baluch. They used napalm bombs, which caused massive destruction to the defenses of the 31 Baluch. Attack on Jamalpur didn't start even in the evening of the 9th of December because Brigadier Clare was up to something else. The 13 Raj, they crossed the river. They established a roadblock here on the Jamalpur-Maimanshing Road, also cutting off the Jamalpur-Maimanshing Railroad. 1st Maratha Light Infantry, this one, as said before, comes down all the way from here to here, settles down here and establishes a roadblock on the Jamalpur-Tangail Road. Jamalpur-Tangail Road, this one, with elements of the Mukti Bahini. The 6th Sikh Ally from the 167 Infantry Brigade establishes a roadblock here, and now the attack is prepped up. At 3 p.m. on the 9th of December, Brigadier Clare and Lieutenant Colonel Brar decided to write a letter to Lieutenant Colonel Sultan Ahmed, the commander of the 31 Baluch inside Jamalpur. In this letter, Brigadier Clare himself dictated while Lieutenant Colonel Brar started writing it down. And in this letter, he clearly asked the Pakistani battalion commander to surrender to the Indian Armed Forces. He also said to the Pakistani commander that his battalion was encircled from all sides by a complete brigade. He also said that if needed, the Indian Air Force will crush the 31 Baluch. So, for Lieutenant Colonel Sultan Ahmed to save his life and to save the life of his men, the only option for him was to surrender to Brigadier Hardev Singh Clare. This letter was taken by Mukti Bahini fighter Munshi Zahirul Haq, who rode a bicycle with a white flag on, and he took this letter to the headquarters of the Pakistani 31 Baluch. Fortunately, he was treated well by the Pakistanis. He was given a cup of tea, and this letter was presented to Lieutenant Colonel Sultan Ahmed and the 2IC. Reading this letter, Lieutenant Colonel Sultan Ahmed thought that it was just a bluff. He couldn't believe that an entire brigade had closed in on him. He just thought that it might be just a lone Indian army company. He decided to call it a bluff, and wrote another letter saying that he will not surrender and wrapped a 7.6 millimeter bullet inside it. And he said that he will fight to the end. Munshi Zahirul Haq came back with this letter by 5:30 p.m. that evening on the 9th of December. Reading this letter, Brigadier Clare decided to go all in. From that night, the 1st Maratha Light Infantry started sending on patrols. A patrol under the command of Lieutenant Daphne moved up just 1,000 yards away from the garrison of the 31 Baluch, and heavy firefighting went on. The Pakistanis desperately tried to break out over and over again, sending out patrols to test the weaknesses of the 1st Maratha Light Infantry, but they were just being harassed. Eventually that night, the 13th Rajrif crossed the Brahmaputra River and started crushing the Pakistani defenders inside Jamalpur. So the 13th Rajrif crosses the river and launches an attack on the 31 Baluch. The 13 Guards also tries to attack, push from here. The 6th Sikh Ally pushes from here, while to escape down south towards Tangail, the 31 Baluch opens up mortar fire on the 1st Maratha Light Infantry. Brigadier Clare realized that the enemy will try to break out from here. He asked the men to stay alert and calm. Midnight marked the end of the 9th of December. And after that, more Pakistani patrols came out and they again kept on opening fire to find out gaps in the defenses of the 1st Maratha Light Infantry. But this time, the Marathas didn't open fire. Eventually, a bit later, all the rifle companies of the 31 Baluch, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Sultan Ahmed himself, arrived to escape from Jamalpur, taking the Jamalpur-Tangail road. And this time, they came under heavy small arms and machine gun fire from the defenses of the 1st Maratha Light Infantry. They were just mowed down. They were completely taken unprepared and unaware. Also, this heavy enemy infantry force was pounded the guns of the 56th Mountain Regiment. Major P.P. Bhagat, the father of Chetan Bhagat, was with the 1st Maratha Light Infantry as the forward observation officer, and he called the artillery barrages on the enemy, pounding them down. The Pakistanis were screaming and were also screaming their battle cries, trying to break out from the defenses of the 1st Maratha Light Infantry, but they were just being mowed down. At first, they attacked C Company of the 1st Maratha Light Infantry. They were just butchered. Then they attacked Y Company under the command of Major Satish Nambiar, and Y Company bore the brunt of the attack. A and D companies were attacked by the desperate Pakistanis, but here they were also butchered. The air was filled with the cries of the wounded, men being shot, and Pakistanis screaming the utmost abusive words they can on the Indian Armed Forces. Yes, fact is fact, but what happened was that the entire area was filled with corpses of Pakistani soldiers in pieces, riddled with bullet holes. Corpses were found even 5 to 10 yards away from a machine gun nest of the 1st Maratha Light Infantry. They were just shot to hell like fish in a barrel. Most of them eventually fled to Jamalpur garrison, and by the time the night was over, it was all like a spook of hell. The morning fog had lifted, the air was still heavy with the cries of the wounded, and Brigadier Hardev Singh Clare himself, being close to the defenses, had congratulated Lieutenant Colonel Brar for such a gallant defense. On the 10th of December, the 1st Maratha Light Infantry moves up, and the 31 Baluch, of course, with the CO to have fled. The survivors of this Pakistani battalion surrender to the Indian Army's 95 Mountain Brigade and to the GOC of 101 Communication Zone, General Nagra. Jamalpur is finally liberated. Soon they all decided to enter Jamalpur garrison, and Y Company of the 1st Maratha Light Infantry headed out first. Brigadier Clare and Lieutenant Colonel Brar, they were both walking to move up to the city of Jamalpur, and they found the jeep of Lieutenant Colonel Sultan Ahmed, which still had the ignition key inside it. This guy had just fled, seeing what was happening to his entire battalion. His luggage was still inside the jeep, and the jeep was just 500 yards away from the defenses of the 1st Maratha Light Infantry. Reaching the garrison, it was found that about 371 ranks of the 31 Baluch were still alive, and they were desperately trying to find a way to surrender. Seeing the Indian Army approaching, Major Fazle Akbar, the 2IC of the 31 Baluch, Lieutenant Zaidi, and the battalion Subedar Major came forward and said that all night they had been trying to reach any Indian Army formation nearby on the radio, for desperately pleading to take their surrender. Yes, that was the condition of the Pakistani army at that time. So, after the 9th of December, on the morning of the 10th of December, the 31 Baluch of the Pakistani army was completely wiped out from action. When the news correspondents came to meet Brigadier Hardev Singh Clare and congratulate him for this victory, they found bullet holes in his para jacket. When they pointed this for him, he said that no Pakistani bullet has been ever made to hit him. His sleeping bag had bullet holes in them. His radio set was shot by stray Pakistani bullets. Yet he had survived. 371 ranks of the Pakistani army had surrendered with one 106mm RCL gun, four 120mm mortars, many medium machine guns, a few 81mm mortars, and about 600 assault rifles and weapons with assorted ammunition. Also, in the firefight the last night, about 234 Pakistani soldiers were killed, 23 being wounded, and 61 letting down their arms and surrendering to the 1st Maratha Light Infantry itself. It was on the previous night. Brigadier Clare had informed about this surrender to his boss, Major General Gandharv Singh Nagra, and he arrived by chopper and he hugged Clare, saying that, Harry, you could have done this alone. You could have taken this surrender alone. But Brigadier Clare said that he was his boss, so he had to be present at Jamalpur to witness the surrender of this entire Pakistani battalion. About half of the Pakistani 93 Infantry Brigade was taken down from action. The city of Jamalpur was finally liberated. But in this action, the Marathas had paid the ultimate price. 10 men were killed in action, 1 JCO and 7 soldiers were wounded. They were all evacuated by Mi-4 helicopters, with Captain Tripathi and his men attending the wounded both from the enemy and both from our side. With the surrender of the enemy, Jamalpur being free, Brigadier Clare took his jeep and was heading out towards the headquarters of the Pakistani 31 Baluch. But near the officers' mess of the 31 Baluch, he noticed a bungalow, and just outside were a few women standing in salwar kameez. Lieutenant Tahir from the Mukti Bahini was with him, and Brigadier Clare asked who these ladies were. Lieutenant Tahir said that these ladies were Bengali women who were dishonored by the Pakistani officers and soldiers in this bungalow. Brigadier Clare approached the women and said that they were free to leave. The women eventually dressed up in saris and left the place, never to return again. The local Mukti Bahini, under the command of Captain Zainul Abedin, raised the Bangladeshi flag in the town of Jamalpur. The entire city went up in jubilation, welcoming the Indian Army and the Mukti Bahini. They all started screaming the Joy Bangla slogan and their national anthem, Amar Sonar Bangla, Ami Tomaye Bhalobashi. They arranged for a felicitation ceremony for the Indian Army, where Major General Gandharv Singh Nagra was also present. Brigadier Clare himself witnessed the jubilation of the crowds, and also the locals started talking about the horrific atrocities that they had encountered in the entire 9 months of the war. They spoke of the Razakars who extorted money from the local people by supporting the Pakistani army atrocities and the occupation. They also talked of Razakars and Pakistani soldiers and officers who kidnapped women in the middle of the night and molested them. The local people had anger towards every Pakistani soldier and officer in Jamalpur, except for one Pakistani officer, Lieutenant Zaidi, for whom they had a good word, that this guy was not like the others. Victory was in, but the war was far from over. A Bailey bridge was constructed on the Brahmaputra river by the engineers for the troops to cross. Vehicles of the 31 Baluch that were still okay and working were lined up to be used in the further offensives by the Indian armed forces. The survivors of the Pakistani 93 Infantry Brigade was on the run and they were needed to be caught. An airdrop was fixed to resupply the 95 Mountain Brigade, and the move towards Tangail was now on, with the first Indian Army airborne assault and the Tangail paradrop coming to life, about to make history. Will it be a bridge too far for the 95 Mountain Brigade?